Hey everybody, welcome back to SEC Roundup. My name is Nick Morgan. I'm the founder of ICAN, Investor Choice Advocates Network, and the host of today's SEC Roundup. Got three fabulous guests today, starting in my top left corner, Kayvan Sadeghi, who is a partner at Jenner. Kayvan, thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be here.
Got Marlon Williams from the Atlanta Blockchain Center and a member of the board of the PulseChain Foundation. Marlon, thanks.
Hi.
Hey. And Matt, also a member of the foundation, the PulseChain Foundation. Down, Matt, thank you for joining.
How's it going?
So the purpose of our getting together today is to talk about the SEC case, the SEC PulseChain case, filed back in July of 2023. It took a while for the usual court machinery to get moving to the point where the defendant in the case filed a motion to dismiss. And the four of us actually were involved in filing an amicus brief in that case, and I'll let you all talk about that in a minute, particularly you, Kayvan. But to just sort of set the stage, when the SEC filed this complaint, a lot of the allegations looked very similar to what we've seen now over the years in other SEC complaints in the digital asset space, with one big exception that made this complaint stand out in very sort of strange ways legally. So, Kevin, let's hear from you first. You've seen a lot of SEC complaints against digital asset companies and people associated with them. What about this complaint sort of stood out in your mind as particularly new?
Sure. It jumps right off the page on the caption itself. You mentioned the defendant in the case, and there is one human defendant in the case. But in addition to the human defendant, there are three additional named defendants that are software. They're not entities, they're not people. The SEC in this case named Hex, which it defines as the ERC20 token, and PulseChain, which it defines as a fork of the Ethereum blockchain, and PulseX, which is a protocol deployed on the Ethereum blockchain. And this is the first case that I've seen where the SEC is suing the token itself or the blockchain itself or a protocol as a party defendant in the case. And it tries to do this by saying that these are somehow alter egos of the individual defendant. But to argue that the code, the software itself, is an alter ego of a human really is bizarre, as we point out in our papers, and unprecedented as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, unprecedented as far as I'm aware too. Although I will say we're all aware of the OFAC case involving Tornado Cash, where there have been comparisons made where OFAC named an entity as a defendant. Is this like that case?
Yeah, there's a critical distinction there with the Tornado Cash case. The Tornado Cash case was the U.S.'s sanctioned powers under IEPA, and what they defined as and they can go after a person or entity, for sanctions, and they're defined the entity, which has a particular and pretty broad definition under that sanctions power, and they defined the entity as the association of developers and the DAO that would vote on changes to the protocol, and then they can impose sanctions to block property of that entity. And so they were not claiming that the smart contracts were themselves an entity. They were defining as the entity this broader association of human beings, what you'd typically think of as an association of some form, and then saying that enabled them to impose sanctions, directed at the property of that entity. Here, the SEC seems to be taking the approach that the token itself is somehow an association or an entity or an alter ego, and that's something I don't think we've seen anything remotely analogous to.
Yeah, well, we pointed that out in the amicus brief. Hopefully the judge will take note and act accordingly. One of the other aspects, or one of the other things we pointed out in the brief, was that sometimes the SEC, and maybe often, some people would say the SEC doesn't pay enough attention to the secondary impacts that its cases might have. So, for example, we just saw the judge in the Coinbase case refuse to let the SEC case against the wallet go forward. We've seen some criticism in the library case about the secondary impacts on library token users. Ripple, same thing. Secondary trading was an issue in the Ripple case on the motion to dismiss. So So Marlon, here there is a very vibrant community, as I understand it, in the PulseChain community. Obviously, there was a petition that Matt can talk a little bit about. Can you describe for us the PulseChain community, some of the things they're up to that might be impacted by this case?
Yeah, sure. I'd be more than happy to. I think, one of the things that attracted me to the community as a whole is the fact that, you know, it holds the principles of crypto dearly, right? There are a lot of blockchain ecosystems out there. I mean, a lot of experience, and I support a lot of them because, again, it's really just a lot of innovation in this new age that we're entering. But particularly with the PulseChain community, a lot of the things that we subscribe to in the crypto space, namely, self-sovereignty around our finances, for example, real DeFi, right? Where we're not interacting with intermediaries when we're transacting. It's just fully on-chain, decentralized protocols. That community, our community really reflects those principles, when compared to a lot of other ecosystems where there is a team behind it, there is some sort of centralization. PulseChain doesn't represent that. And as a result, it has attracted a ton of innovators, a ton of creators all over the world. I mean, it's one of the most vibrant communities in the blockchain industry, and I know because, again, I am part of other ecosystems, right? But what attracts me to this ecosystem is just all of the just the freedom to express ourselves and to build without any fear of repercussions or being silenced. We have the true ability just to express ourselves on chain in multiple ways, and you see all sorts of applications being built on PulseChain, right? Some of them you guys mentioned in the brief, like NFT Pulse and others, where there's a ton of artwork being done that kind of covers the gamut of different types of creativity. Some is very interesting, but again, these are individuals that are able to express themselves freely without any fear of censorship. And again, interacting with third parties. So I was quite shocked to see that the SEC went after software. And I've been a software developer since 2001, right? So I've seen the maturity of the software industry from the 90s into what it is today, well before crypto. So it was quite a shocker to me, just as a software developer, to see that code was being sued.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, we'll see how the judge reacts to that. This is a novel thing, but it's the fact that there is a community out there expressing themselves on chain, I think does set PulseChain apart in many ways from some of the other digital assets out there. That community is active. One of the things we cited in our brief was a petition that seems to have potentially tens of thousands of signers. Matt, what do you think? What's been the community's reaction to the lawsuit, and are there impacts from the lawsuit that are of concern to the community?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, we got 44,000 signatures from people across the globe, mind you. So this is not America we're talking about. It's majority of global participants in this decentralized ecosystem, which, this PulseChain, PulseX, Hex network, they're all interconnected, but they really are as close to decentralized open source software as you can get in the crypto space. I mean, it's a clone of Ethereum 2.0. So if you're going to call into question PulseChain, it makes you think what's next, right? Ethereum, the second largest crypto of all time. So it's kind of nobody's feeling like they're safe right now. There's this chilling effect that's kind of fallen over everybody, especially our community, but it's kind of rampant in crypto in general, specifically in the USA, because nobody knows what's going to happen next. Is the SEC going to try to stifle my free speech? And so we've got, hundreds of content creators, business owners selling, physical merchandise, or whether it be just live streaming and doing educational programs such as myself. Like, I'm only one of hundreds of online business owners, you could say, whose entire livelihoods are threatened by this thing. So if this decentralized software program is somehow called into question, I'm not sure how the software is going to take itself to court and sit at a court table. But if this goes wrong, this could affect hundreds and thousands of people all across the globe. I'll say that again, not specifically in the USA. So this is overreach if I've ever seen it. You've got entire political parties that have actually, in the USA, the Texas Independence Nationalist Movement, the Texit movement, some people call it, has actually created an endowment fund token on the PulseChain blockchain, which to them was just as simple as picking PulseChain or Ethereum based on the premise that they were decentralized enough to not have a single owner. There's nodes all over the world. There's no off switch on these things. It makes me wonder if the SEC really understands what is being called into question here. People can bring up cases like Tornado Cash that are vastly different because there was an organization full of people to point to. This is literally open source code. There is no owner. There is no central cabal of people. There's no incorporation. There's no building. I don't go to work every day at the PulseChain Incorporated building. That doesn't exist, right? So I think the fundamental nature of these programs is misunderstood here. You've got, like Marlon said, artists, thousands of artists inscribing their art onto the blockchain for the immutability aspect of it. It's one thing to make art, but then to tie an irreversible serial number to that so it can live on a public publishing ledger, which is what blockchains are, for all of eternity. That's the value that a lot of artists have ascribed to the PulseChain ecosystem. You've got recreational activities, people expressing their freedoms in real life. You've got there's a Lamborghini racing team that comes to mind in the UK, and they like to put the Hex and PulseChain logos on their cars just because it's a passion on the side that they're incorporating with their livelihoods day to day. You've got people touring the USA. That's where I met Marlon, actually, at the PulseChain tour, right? And these are just groups of individuals that decided to get up their butts and come meet each other because we all have like-minded ideals and we all share the same interests. And again, the turnout to these things is, in the hundreds of people, and it's all over the world again. So there's a tour right now continuing across Europe where people that believe in open source decentralized publishing software can get together and just talk about it, talk about what they're building, talk about some interesting stuff that's happening there. So this is kind of the bleeding edge of innovation, and it would be a real shame for the wrong precedent to be set by this case. I believe it's bigger than anything we've seen so far. It's actually bigger than Coinbase or Kraken, all these things. And I dare to say that because this is, like you said, a different paradigm. There's decentralized lines of code trying to be treated as a human being in corporation. So it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Well, you raised a good point, Matt, that you don't report to work at the PulseChain corporate headquarters. The next step in this litigation, like any litigation, will be for the SEC to serve the complaint and summons on the defendants. And for the 3 software defendants, it'll be interesting to see how they do that because they can't go to the PulseChain headquarters. So there are alternate ways to do these things. Ultimately, they're going to have to get the court's permission as to how to serve these other defendants. And then the next step, assuming the software doesn't show up in court to defend itself, whether the judge will be willing to enter some kind of default judgment against them. So there's more to be heard in the court proceedings, but there's clearly a vibrant community out there that's going to be following the case that's very interested in the outcome. So I think all 4 of us will be watching to see what happens next in the litigation. In the meantime, thank you all for joining, and for everybody else, we'll see you at the next SEC Roundup. Until then, goodbye.